Well, I've just been commissioned to paint this painting, this picture of this photograph here, which would make an ideal watercolour. In fact, it would be nice in watercolour, pastels or acrylics, doesn't really matter, but in this case we've looked at some of my past work and feel that the method and the medium would suit this particular image. So first I want to use, to stretch some paper. Got a sheet of rough here, and I've already, as you see, cut my lengths of gum tape. Make sure you cut the gum tape first before wetting the paper, because once your fingers are wet, if you touch the reel of gum tape, the whole reel gets ruined because it just glues it all the way across. So we've got the gum tape ready. I've got a large sheet of paper, which is a bit large for the board really, because I'm going to have to go around the edges slightly to do this one. I don't want to cut the paper down, so I'm able to stick around here, but I'm going to have to go around the edges of the board to do the edges of the board. Then we'll let it dry out. Let it dry naturally. Don't speed it up by using a fan heat or anything like that, because the tension can become so great the paper will actually split. That's not a good idea, is it? So I've now got to go and soak this both sides twice, bring it back, let it settle, and just move it once or twice while it settles so that the paper doesn't blister. And then it'll tighten out on its own, and when it's completely dry we can paint, and any cockling that happens will then flatten out again afterwards. So now I'm going to go and wet the paper. Right, that's been thoroughly wetted both sides. Now we can lay it down on the board and give it a little while to expand with the water. Don't stick your tape on straight away. Just let it, it's starting to cockle a bit there now. It's to be allowed to cockle, and do a bit more. There's a little bit there that's not quite wet enough. It's drying out too soon, so I'll just wet that a little bit more, make sure that it's all evenly soaked, which it should be. You don't need to tap in the bath. Shower's a good thing to do as well sometimes. Where else? Now we can wet the gum tape. So run that under the tap. I can bring this out. Over the table. I'll stick about half gum tape width to the paper. Level it out, smooth it out, fold it around, and that'll hold that down nicely. Fold that right around the board. Same the other end. I prefer to have the paper within the board, it's much easier, but it is a very large piece. As long as you've got it well taped down, as long as it can't pull away from the nasty tape, you should be safe. Give it a nice flat drum-like surface. You can see already how the paper's cockling further. As we've already flattened it out twice, we should be safe enough now. There we go. Make sure it sticks right down to the board, because this weight of paper doesn't always need stretching. I mean, this is a heavy weight. It's a £200 rough, so it's quite a heavy weight paper, and that doesn't always need stretching anyway. But I've decided to do that on this big sheet. Well, the paper's stretched out very nicely now. It's tight as a drum and smooth. Oh, it's rough paper that is smooth, that is. And I've marked quarters onto my photograph. And I've marked quarters, let's say, onto my page. So I've now just got to scale up these shapes from one to another. For instance, where this mark starts here, it's about 2/3 up in that line there. So if I go to halfway again there, and then 2/3 up there, 1, 2, that bit of tree there starts like that, and that's all I've got to do to make the mark. I'm going to go ahead and get all of these salient points and then start to join them up.
And I think I've got enough information there with the drawing. You can see it now. All the basic composition spatially worked out. I'm going to start from the sky, put my way through all the background and then work back into the foreground and so on. I might actually, yes, I'll just do the sky and some of the background. I might actually do some work on the figures early on in the picture too and then work the loose up afterwards.
Okay, so our drawing's ready now. Let's look at what materials we're going to use. There you can see the photograph we're going to use, and I've got 5 brushes here, a number 8 graduate, a comb brush which is a serrated edge, a rigger, a 4 watercolour brush, I'm using graduate in this case, a De La Roundel, and a Pro Art large oval mop which I favour greatly. And I'm going to be using the SAA professional watercolours, artist watercolours. They're very good for the price. The only change I will make is that I'm going to use a Winsor & Newton ultramarine blue, French ultramarine, because it granulates slightly better than I think the SAA one does at the moment. They may change that. Otherwise their paints are excellent. I'll put this on screen for you as well so you can see it more fully, but as you can see I've chosen these colours here. We've got lemon yellow, intense violet, Prussian blue, turquoise, ultramarine. That's the French ultramarine. Ultramarine is different in itself. French ultramarine is much bluer. Orange yellow, and I do find again a difference in makes here. The orange yellow by the SAA is a much deeper, almost chrome yellow, whereas in the Winsor & Newton it's a much paler, lighter lemon. Quincodrome magenta is a lovely colour. As we said, the French ultramarine, hooker's green. Indigo I like as well for mixing my darks often, and the alizarin crimson obviously is a lovely one. Scarlet Lake, a very bright red. I'll possibly add burnt sienna to this because I do want a slightly warmer brown when mixing my blue greys. I'm going to add both burnt sienna to this palette, and I've got masking fluid here which I need to apply either with a fine brush or a very fine clay shaper. That's to make the white lines, because we don't use white paint normally. We can use the resist of the masking fluid to paint the watercolour over it when it's dry and then remove it afterwards to leave white paper showing later. So there we are, that's our basic materials, brushes and everything here now that we're going to need. Now these paints come in tubes and then we put them into the pans ourselves. You can buy these watercolour paints in little square pans, or half pans even, half the size. One of the nice things about them is that when they dry out, which you can see here now they're quite dry, you can re-wet them. But that you need to do before we start painting. So although my colours are out here, I need to just damp these, and I'm just going to show you them on the piece of paper here so you can get an idea of the colours that we're going to be using. So let's all look at these colours then. So the water, go over each of them, a little dab of water. It takes a moment for them to start to soften up. And then we can see what colours we've got here, because I've forgotten which one is which now. Well, I'm pretty sure I know. That's I've just put there so it's still wet. And I know that's my blue and it's still wet. So if we just take a little touch of these now, we should be able to see clearly enough on here. This is the lemon yellow. Look how lovely and lemon yellow that is. And if we take a little bit of the Oriolan yellow, you can see how much more orange yellow that is. We'll take a little bit of the very Scarlet Lake, bright red, and look how that will link in there with our reds. So here we have the Scarlet Lake, the very bright red. This is the Quincodrome magenta, and then a bit cooler should be the, which is this one, and that's almost like the, but just a little bit cooler, like the Quincodrome magenta, but magenta's a lot pinker. We'll come across to these that we've got here. That's the intense violet, beautiful. This one looks to be the Prussian blue, we'll see in a moment. That looks like the indigo because it's got more black in it. That's the turquoise. So you see, they're very hard to see what they are when they're dried out like this. And that's the Cooker's green, which we're going to be using. We could make our own greens, but I'll show you how this is going to work in a moment. And then the lovely ultramarine blue, this one here. See, that's it. You can see how it's granulating there. I don't know if you can see that, but it's actually granulating even on the paper there, as it should do. And we'll come across to the burnt sienna. Again, this is a Winsor & Newton one, but the SCA one is perfectly good. Just happen to have this one. So there we are. That's our range of colours. Because I'm not going to need this colour, I'll take it out and I'll remove the burnt sienna from here. So I just put down across to here. And I can keep those palettes clear. It doesn't take much to tint a muddier colour. It's very, very pure colours these, and you want to keep them nice and clean. Now let's just look at making greys, for instance. I'll just take my medium brush here. And one of the nicest greys we can make is by using the French ultramarine and a little touch of the burnt sienna. It gives a lovely grey, and we can make it warmer or cooler. See what I'm doing here. I put that onto there. See that lovely grey we get. Make it a bit stronger, so we're putting more pigment in now. Drop that in, and it's giving a slight granulation because it's got this ultramarine in, so you can see it granulating now. I'll go in close in just a moment. We can make it to a warmer grey by adding more brown. More of the burnt sienna, that is, or we can make it cooler by adding more blue. Going the other way around. So see that lovely effect we can get with those greys. Something we're going to need with this sky in particular. But let's see what happens if we use a cooler blue. Let's see what happens if we use the turquoise, for instance, to make a. Let's take the turquoise and we'll make a grey with that and see what that one does. So it'll be a softer bluer grey, if you like. A little bit of the brown into it, and we get a much paler blue. And if we go into a warmer with that, I'm going to take a touch of the quincadrone and I'm going to add that to it to give a pinky grey. Because I know these are colours I'm going to want in here, looking at this photograph. I'll show you that photograph in a minute so you can start to see these colours. Now if I bring the photograph over here, you can actually start to see this pinker colour coming in here, this bluer colour here, and the browner colour coming down into these clouds. And there we have our colours for the cloud effects quite easily. And you can see how they blend one into another. That's painting wet next to wet. We're going to be painting like that, but also dropping colours into it as well to get the effects we want. The same with the trees. Let's have a closer look at that. We'll zoom down onto those colours. See how lovely and vibrant they are. You can see here when I was talking about granulation, you see this business of it separating the colours out slightly. Not so much here with these colours, but when it's got the ultramarine, French ultramarine in it, it does tend to granulate more, which is very effective and very nice in the clouds. Now normally we paint our big areas first and details in finely towards the end. We start loose and finish tight. But with this particular painting I'm going to be doing slightly the opposite to that. I want to pick up on some of these smaller details here firstly, not too tightly, fairly loosely with watercolour techniques, and have them all finished before I then come back in with these lovely washes in the background and wet into wet soft effects. So we've got a rainy day. Let's paint these figures and details in first. Before I do anything though, I'm going to put the masking fluid on, which is this one. I'm using an SAA masking fluid here. This is a blue masking fluid so I can see where I put it. And I also like the Pabio one, but the SAA, adequate, cheaper, and a very good material. Now that they've improved it greatly.
Be careful with masking fluid on hot days though, it tends to melt into the paper, so don't allow sunlight onto it once you put it on, otherwise it can be difficult to get it off later. So what am I going to put it on with? Well, this is an SAA masking brush. You can see here on the words, possibly just, and it's a nylon brush which will allow the the latex to be rubbed off afterwards or washed off. So it's good for the heavier bits. It's not quite so easy to make a fine edge of it. So on the end of the brush I've sharpened it off, look, to give a point. Let's do the fine things first. First shake the masking fluid up. And let's look where we've got little bits of white. Now these are called clay shapers and they've got rubber ends. And they're probably a bit better than the sharpening the end of the brush for doing fine lines because they're more pliable. Let's just try these and we'll see. Just to feel some of the edges of these stones, to give the feeling of, which it can be very, very light, white fine lines later. So we're planning ahead, and watercolour's a bit like that. It's a bit like planning a battle. We've got to know all our techniques to plan them ahead like this. Just get the glistening of the water on the edges of these slabs. Planning them well ahead. Little areas of the white behind here, and on top of this table got some napkin serviettes and things, so just put those in as well. And there are various tools for doing this. You can get bottles of masking fluid with fine needle ends, but they don't always work as well as you'd like. They tend to, some of them tend to clog up, or the needles won't work, or they. So these simple tools, basics, are like these clay shapers, are often the best way to go. Their faces, and they've got little white hats on. So that should be about it for the bits of white we need there. Now we could do these buildings in the background as well while we're at it. We'll just indicate them. They want to be standing out a bit. So we'll make those a little bit sharper, because this will give us sharp edges. So although we want wet into wet, there's no harm in, because I can always soften the edges later. That's the point. Now we have to let this masking fluid absolutely dry. If we don't, when we come to paint, it'll mix in with the paint and mess the brushes up and make a complete mess of everything. So we've got to really be a bit more patient and just let it dry off. There. That should be all the whites we need for the masking fluid. So I have to let those dry off completely, and then we'll be able to start our first colours on the figures. Okay, this masking fluid's dry enough now, so I can start to work on the figures. To start off with a number 8, the graduates, and let's just work these up wet next to wet and wet into wet to get these effects of the figures. To start with, you can work out what some of these colours actually are. There's a slight pinky tint to it, so I'm going to start with a very light touch of the Quinkleton magenta. A very light, thin coat of that. So it's a slightly warmer blue. Suck some of that out with the brush again, just to give it a coat. Now remember that watercolour dries lighter than when you put it on, so this is going to dry quite a bit lighter. So now I want to take some of the turquoise, very thin, just little tints of it at the minute. I'll just glaze that into there, let the wet into wet effect take effect as the paint just creeps down into the colour next to it. Now a little bit warmer blue, I'll take some
ultramarine, and we'll just come a little bit stronger into this bit of ultramarine here. See, the slightest touch can make all the difference, and I want to do the most with the least. So in other words, I'm going to use the least colour or the least brush strokes to say the most. Keep them as simple as I can. Slightly stronger there, a bit stronger on this bit here. Just letting it flow out enough. Now you've got to gauge the timing of this, because if it's too wet, the colour's going to go everywhere. Let that one dry off, and in the meantime, I'm going to come down to the turquoise again, and I'm going to use this on her jeans down here to paint the whole of those jeans, because they're a cooler blue. And then with some of the magenta I just used, with some of the ultramarine, I'm going to paint this figure in. Just a couple of strokes is all I want, just to keep it simple. You know that's white just there on these shoes. And some of that brighter red on his face. So a little bit of the crimson just to go in there on the face. Again, a little bit of the magenta. There's a bright bit of magenta just here. And I'll make that a little bit stronger, so there's a bit more pigment in that one, just to bring that out a bit more. You see the difference between that and that now. And while that's drying, let's take some of the quinquedrone and the magenta and some ultramarine, and we'll just tidy up this turquoise on the leg here, get it a bit darker down those bleeding edges and here. Simple strokes, keep it nice and simple. A bit more of that blue as well into the figure here. Few simple strokes is all I want to say, all I need to say. A little bit darker there, we'll take a wee touch of the Prussian. Just drop that in. It takes a few marks, just a mark here and a mark there, as long as they're in the right places, right colours, right shapes, right places, relevant one to another, and this whole thing will come together. And her actual jacket is a lovely ultramarine, so I'm going to take the ultramarine pure and put all over that jacket. Now it's had time to dry into the umbrella, so when I put this on, it shouldn't spread into the umbrella. I'll put a nice layer of this ultramarine, a medium coat into here first of all. Like that. Now I want a stronger colour dropping into it, so right underneath here, so I'm going to go in with stronger ultramarine. In other words, I'm putting more paint on the brush. Drop this into here. But stronger still. Let's really plaster this blue on here to get the vibrancy. That down through into here. And then some of that indigo, just to find the darks a bit here. Quite strong indigo. We'll just drop a little bit of the dark in down here, there, under the umbrella here, on that side, a little bit there, and a little bit down the bottom there. And that figure is done. Don't do any more on that. I need to go into the shadow a little bit here maybe, and down here, just to get the feeling of the shadows, and the same here with this figure. And that's quite dark, so I'm going to use the indigo pure to be very dark just on this bit here. Against that, there's his head, hair, around here, right down into the umbrella, and right up into here, all the way down through there, with a medium tint of the indigo. Just down the back of his leg here as well, and the shadow part of the legs, right down to there. Darker still. The Prussian, or the indigo, sorry, and really drop that in, and I could add a little bit of the very deep mauve to that to give one mustard black, make it much warmer. Dark under there, much deeper here, the feeling of that arm. A bit lost here as to where things go, so it doesn't matter, that's what we want to do, we're just going to be a bit lost. While I'm at it, this bag can be painted in, but I don't need to do too much of that yet. I'm just I'm going to put a bit of green into that. Very dark, but I want a bit of darker coat still, so I'm using quite strong paint now, as you might notice. And I'll bring that across on my shoulder here, all the way down into there. Very simple shapes. The arm comes down a bit darker while it's still wet enough to paint, let wet go into wet. So this figure's virtually done, we don't need to do too much more. There on the feet. Probably that foot comes across there, tiny mark underneath. Down on the front of the shoe here. I might go a little bit stronger yet with the ultramarine, I think. Just drop a wee bit more in here, make it a bit bluer, especially underneath the umbrella there. Down here. Back to the turquoise, because there's quite a light blue turquoise there on those legs. Come right across this umbrella here, and we're going to put that in as a turquoise. And this one as well. Just to start off with, then we'll change colours as we go along. And these want to be much warmer, so now I'm going to take that ultramarine again and just start to find how that can bleed into, if we paint wet into wet, we can let that bleed into this. This is much warmer than the colour back there, it's much bluer. Which is why I'm doing the ultramarine into here now. And when that's a little bit drier, I'm going to come back in with some of the Prussian again, and purple to get the very dark stripes in it. Right, take the ultramarine again, and we'll do the whole of that umbrella inside. Simple blocking in. See the masking fluid working here now on that edge. So you've got to be nice and fresh with the watercolour. You've got to keep it lovely and transparent. Now we've got there the beauty of the transparency of the colour. Let's make it even bluer. Really let some paint come down into there. You can see the granulation happening now with this paint, which we do want. And actually that figure there is going to be the same. We're not going to use the turquoise on him, we're just going to use the ultramarine. These figures here are deep blue as well. A couple of strokes, just put them in. Don't want to get too complicated with them before I come back in with my darker colours on him. Now, I was talking about the Prussian and the indigo. Let's go back to the Prussian. Should be this one. Yeah, and we'll drop that in quite strongly, wet into wet up here, so that it flows downwards. You'll see my paper is actually at an angle, so that any wet paint is going to flow down around her from the top here. Just get the feeling of the umbrellas coming across here. That nice luminous deep blue, and then to my indigo, which is a slightly blacker colour, and I'll come in just on this top edge and a wee bit of the purple, just to give real depth here. We go quite dark at the moment. His head's very dark too there, it'll be dark against the umbrella there. Those figures too are dark. It's light against dark, warm against cool, rough against smooth. All the time we're playing our opposites here. It's quite dark in there. We've got masking fluid there, so I can afford to go quite dark just there. Right across everything with the Prussian. Back to my indigo. The amount of light in between. Down there, go down the back of the hair slightly here too, there we go. Right down to here. Some lighter colour just there. Now I want to use just the Prussian coming down here. A little bit of dry brushwork there. Back to the indigo again. The darks. We're really plastering some of these darks now. My finger just to blend that round.
very dark just down there. This leg is very dark. I just want to show it as almost one stroke. Lovely colours we can get. And then back to my purple again, just to put a bit more warmth into it. We're using very dark colours here, but very deep, intense violet. I want to get a bit of that going on down to the legs here. Really feel these deep colours. Well, this is still wet enough, we'll just add a bit more into there. So look at these yellows. Yellow ochre actually would be nice here, but we don't have that in the palette and hopefully we won't need it. I'm going to use the aureolin yellow now on those. Let me just drop in this. First I just want to drop in the darks here on her legs. Not warmer, so I'm going to add a bit more blue on there. Just really bring that out, and then back to the darker indigo here and there. Now we're on to the hair now we need to do. Just got a phone or something in the hand here. So let's start with some aureolin yellow, and we'll bring that right the way through as a base colour, the wet into wet for the moment. And that should be dry now, so I can go across this like that. If I kept working on it, it would start to move, so I've just got to go across it very quickly just to get these light. You see how that moved then on me? Don't want that to happen. Let's just bring that back. A little bit of controlled accent there is nice. In fact, we do want some of that colour going on, so I'll pick it up off here and we'll bring it in over to here a little bit. And I want that indigo again. That's the indigo. Slightly muddy indigo. Before I bring the purple in there, we'll bring the hair down. Just the feeling of the hair. I want to start painting every hair follicle in, that's for sure. It'll be quite dark under there, so I'll see what we go. Quite dark just there. Back around her face there too. That'll be a little bit warmer too down there, so I'll just Add a bit of warmth to that in just a moment. Just get some of these creases going in the shadows here. Just let the indigo do the job here. Again, painting wet into wet to get the feeling of these creases and shadows, as we're just going to blend out at the moment quite nicely before I go any stronger. Right, the oleo in yellow and a little bit of burnt sienna, I think, should do the job now. Going a bit warmer, quite a bit warmer. Just do down the hair down here. We'll drop that into the wet paint and make it separate just a bit there. And down here especially. So this is oil in yellow and a little bit of burnt sienna. Really refine these colours. While I have that colour on my brush, notice it elsewhere. It's just over in the hair and the face across here. So let's put her hair in there. Her hand the same. Feel some of these stripes and reflected colours. Still using the oil in yellow and a little bit of burnt sienna, a bit more burnt sienna now into the shoulder here to pull those bones out a bit. And bring it forward. And I'm going to go to my Quincadrone magenta now, because I want some very light colour for her, and warmth for her face here. Just one coat, quite simple. I'll bring some of that into the hair as well, before I make that even warmer. And that Quincadrone is probably coming down into the arm and the hair here as well. And if you use that same burnt sienna and warmth, you can bring that over her face a bit. Let's just tint her face there. And that one side, keeping it simple. I like to go a bit more golden, so a bit more of the burnt sienna. And a wee bit of ultramarine. Use that as yet, so burnt sienna on the ultramarine will give us a nice warm mid-grey here. In fact, it's got some blue coming down her hair there as well. I'll put it in. Under shadow there, so I've got to just go back a bit now. Some of the blue reflecting in there. In fact, we'll take a bit of the turquoise, I think, for that, but it's a cooler blue. I'll bring some of that turquoise into her hair. Really look out for these colours. It's a lot darker under there too. So So I need to go back there with the warmer browns. I'll just darken that down a bit more. And just feel the hair a bit, just with a few strands, you don't have to do too much. And I was talking about doing the darker colours up there, which we want to do now. Take some of that indigo and we can mark in the creases in the umbrella. So being a little bit more careful with these sorts of areas. We can come around her face a bit more now. Just get those features to come out a bit better. Tiny smudges, a bit more depth. Back to the pink again. A bit more warmth, and again a mixture of the ultramarine and sienna, just to get the feeling of shadow on the legs. These colours are fraction. Now they've dried, they've gone lighter, so I can see what I'm doing. And we'll do the same on this umbrella over here. The colours on your brush, use it elsewhere if you feel like it. Saves you mixing it all up again. We'll drop in some of the ultramarine, the French ultramarine into there to get the that umbrella there, and come down into this figure. And the legs are just a couple of strokes. 1, 2. Figures behind there as well. Any little pots and things, now is our chance, so go for the brighter red there. I haven't used that much yet, and we'll just make these two pots that red. I'll put a bit of yellow in just a minute. I'll put a bit of aureole in with those in just a moment. Just want to get them in. See with that one there, that can be quite thin. That wants to be there, that there. Now down to the sienna, where it's a little bit browner than the red. Here, and a wee bit of red into that should do it. Take more orange in there. There we go. Okay, those colours are just starting to sing and work now as we do them. Over here, I want that lemon yellow again. It's a much cooler yellow. Whole of this piece here has a wash of that yellow. It's a much lighter yellow. And this is going to go to a slightly green tint, this one. There we go. Now the warmer yellow into that. In fact, that's the warmer still, so I'm going to take a wee bit of the red. And we'll just make that a bit warmer, a bit more orange as it comes in through there, as compared to this other colour. I have to go to a slightly greener tint over there, so I'm going to take a touch of my green, my hooker's green, and just tint that into the yellow. It's surprising how a little bit of colour like this can just change everything so quickly. So there's my hooker's green going into the yellow here and over here as well to get these shadows.
Oh, that's nice.
Do you like it?
Yeah.
While that green's on my brush, we'll go a little bit along the bottom of these flowers here. Tiny little tints here and there. And the same
down the bottom there, I'm going to take some of the lemon yellow again, go right the way through all of that, leaving some white paper to show. I want to let some of the paper start to sparkle a bit more now. Down there, right off here. Let that dry off and let me paint a sharper line across it. Up here now, and I want a similar thing happening, but I'm going to use some Prussian over the whole thing. I only needed the one. I could be using a bigger brush, but I've only needed the one brush so far. Prussian up the whole of that. Too strong. Down to there, let that blink in. With a little bit of the warmth of the burnt sienna. Just to start to get a feel of the differences in temperature of this. A wee bit of the green as well, especially down here. Find the linkages of colour, and there you are. Look how simple that was. I'm going to soften the edges of that out because I want to blend in colours in the future there, and again hopefully shown very simply. I need some purple just to make this go back a bit more here. A lot more purple just there and darker in that edge. Got a little bit of lettering to do here. Just to feel the edges of that. Down into those figures where it's much, much darker. And back to a very bright yellow. Again, I want almost pure lemon for the plants here. Just get linked down into that with just a little bit of the warmth coming up into it. And the rest is going to be done in the background on that, and this is all going to be wet into wet. That pot here, that's an important one, let's get that in. We'll use the oleolin first, and then we'll come in with the brighter reds, a bit of alizarin into that first of all, to give it a lovely rich, and then we'll calm it down a bit with a wee touch of burnt sienna. So you can see how we built these details up, and now I can go loosely around here. That's the idea. Once now this is done, I can start to work up the wet into wet. I can come down with the sky. I don't think I've got anything else I need to do here now that can't be done quite loosely. I've got to work into the background. I'm going to go with that hookers all the way along here, because it's all a warmer green along here, and drop in these darks into it. In some places a bit stronger, very warm. In others I'll go lighter and use more cool in a moment. Put some yellow to go in there too yet. Because we can use the oleolin yellow a little bit more thickly, a little bit more opaquely if we want to. Lemon yellow certainly you can. Oleolin yellow is usually a very beautiful translucent colour, but in this case it's slightly heavier, so put a thin wash of that into there just to get the feel of it. A nice dark strap going down here I need to get in. Comes from there through here, Okay, I think we're ready to do the sky and drop that right down through these trees, and then we'll come through to the base here afterwards. So we'll just let that dry off a moment, and then we'll look at doing the sky. So I've put a coat of turquoise right the way across this now, do it out of the aircraft. I want really wet into wet paint to work on here to keep this feeling of the rain. Pull it down with the pinks into the misty background, all the way down into there, here, blending it in across these misty greens. Back up to here now, I'm going to start taking on the ultramarine and a wee touch of the burnt sienna to make that blue grey that I want. I'm going to dab that in and let it come down with the gravity of the situation, like that. Make it a bit stronger in just a minute, but I want gravity to pull that down. Plenty of water at the moment, plenty of water. A little touch of the burnt sienna. So we've gone from turquoise to the ultramarine, French ultramarine blue, and a bit of burnt sienna. All the way into here, down through. But just warming it a little bit each time with the burnt sienna to get the lovely effects of these clouds. And you have to do this very, very loosely. You can't keep going over this. You've got to get it in and get it right in the first instance. This is where a bit of experience comes in. So by all means play with your paint beforehand. Have a go at this on a different piece of paper when you're doing the wet into wet, just to really get the feel of it. I can build up the rest of this down here with glazes to get the feeling of the mist coming down into here, which I'm going to do in a moment. Back up into here, and we're going to go a bit stronger yet with the brown and then the blue. Just a little bit more brown into some of it, maybe. Just down areas like this. Really feel these clouds that are wet into wet, spreading down here beautifully. This is where I like to use a heavier paper as well. You get some nice textures in this, and you can see this ultramarine is granulating now, which is good. A little bit more turquoise into it, maybe. That is happening. It should dry out like that now and give us that lovely soft effect for the sky. I want to start dropping in these trees because they're going to come down beautifully as well. So I'm going to take some of the Oreo yellow and just start to drop that in, coming down looking loosely here. It will mix with the existing greens, giving me a, with the blues I mean, giving me a lovely yellow-green as I start to work up these to what I want coming into the clouds here, but very softly and mistily as I gradually get harder and harder and harder with them. But be daring with your paint. Don't hold back pussyfooting with it, and don't keep going over it either. And you can drop in more and more colour as long as you don't totally flood. But obviously we're trying to control this so that it dries and doesn't just become one blob of yellow right up into the sky. It comes all the way down there into there. Now we can start to drop in some of the green, so I'm going to take that Hooker's green and really start to drop that in against this, and hopefully as this now starts to dry my marks will become sharper and sharper and clearer. They won't just keep spreading out into this. As this spreads out, and it is spreading out at the moment, I'm going to have to let it dry a bit more and come back just at the right time to pick up on this, or it's just going to become one mass of a blended yellow and green, and we don't want that. Now we don't need that to merge anymore, that must dry out now as it is. You can just gradually add these darks in here, branches behind. This is where I want to start using my rake brush in a moment. We're still working up these very deep. Start putting some Prussian blue into these greens now. If it's not too wet, so I'm just letting them spread a bit. Nice soft edge. But I don't want to lose it all. As to how thick I paint the paint and how much it spreads out is important. I can use this big brush for the moment for this tip by bit by bit. Now I'll take the rake brush and some of the indigo and we'll just start to try and get the effects of these pine cones at the ends. A rake brush, you can get cone brushes as well, which are much finer. This is about a 3/4 inch, 1 inch rake, which is a slightly heavier brush. So we'll let those now. I've got to let that dry down a bit now, so we don't want to be doing too much more there. This is now drying out quite well. We'll be able to make stronger marks any moment on that. Back to the Prussian, and now I just want to start dropping in a few of these darker blues into the blue-greens in the background here to bring this forward. So that's that. Now how wet is this? Because now we've got to start, I'm going to take some ultramarine and again the burnt sienna, but start to go to a much richer dark down for these branches if they're ready to start yet. Let's see if they are. Using the edge of my large oval mop at the moment. So I want the lost and found edges. At the moment I'm doing lost into the found, and I'm going to come back and tighten up on all of this a lot more yet. This is still the ultramarine and burnt sienna. purple down the middle of that to try and get a bit more depth again. We're still using, I've used a bit of the Prussian pen and Prussian and burnt sienna to get the, you see how that purple now brings those out much better. A bit darker here too. I'm going to use my round brushes as well to do these branches. Just putting a bit more of the purple into this. These twigs and so on. Very lovely, deep warms and cools going on, so we can really get the effect of these lights against darks in the branches here now. Talking about purple, let's come back to it now as we're actually painting these lovely darks in. Let's start to get a few of the purples amongst the greens and yellows here to really bring these out. At the moment, of course, the white is putting us off here, so we can't really tell what's going on. But very soon we should be able to do that base and we'll be able to tell a bit more what's happening, I hope. Right, so that's the basics of the background in. I need to start looking at this foreground, I think. So let's take a nice big flat and see what we can do with that. And again, I want to start with a very light pinks, very light. Make it all wet until wet. We can play with these slabs of paving stones that are capturing the light here. I'm not afraid to paint over some of that stuff there if I need to. So we need to start to use a bit of the turquoise, I've got a feeling. Let's see what we're doing. Yes, here we go. Right, we're about at the right stage to remove the masking fluid, I think. I think that painting is almost there now, except for some details to bring out. So, as I say, let it dry, then we'll wipe off the masking fluid and see where we go from there. I'm going to put a bit of Lisbon crimson into these trees. just to give them a bit more warmth against the greens. It should pull them forward a bit. They're a bit lost at the minute. Yes, so to bring these greens into here. I'd be forgotten, of course, they'll be reflecting as well. Let's see if the masking fluid will come off now, and then what we can do with the painting after that, because any luck, we should be able to complete it. Here we go, look how that masking fluid's coming away, and I can touch it up. I can either keep the lights, or I can take them back. Not too much. I can just take them back a little bit of the painting. Right down to these white bits on here. All the highlights can be dulled down again if we want them to be. They're a bit too bright at the moment. They will just help lift it that bit. Anything else in there? So that's about it. In that tree there. The bag. And now all I've got to do is just take them back a bit, because they're just too much at the moment. Although it certainly brought the painting out. What I can do is just take a small round brush again and just soften some of these back a bit. Just a bit too bright, I just want to take them back just a little bit. Some of them can stay bright, some of them don't want to be quite so bright. Some of them need a few windows or details in them. Just to take away the vivid, sharp edges. Same up here, it's not going to be quite so bright in that tree. Missed a bit there. To get some shadow in around them. Just doing the finishing touches then. It still wants taking back a little bit on these lights. A bit too snowy in places. I think that's just getting towards where I want to go. Well, what do you think? Have you got it? I think this is about as near as I want to go in this case. I think we'll sign that one. Small brush. I'll show you the purple blue. So a little bit of touching up to do here and there. Nothing much over. Just a matter of crossing a few T's and dotting a few I's, I think, nothing serious.
Well, there we are. Fun little watercolour, fun large watercolour. That's what she wants. But I wanted to get this looseness of wet into wet and these misty effects in the background, and using the watercolour to get the actual reflections on the wet pavement there.
Looking at this after the event, I've decided I'd like to just add a few more lights back in again. So I'm just going to take a little bit of an acrylic here, so that we can cheat on. And I'm just going to put in a few of the lighter colours back into here, just to bring out these lights of acrylic. A bit of acrylic. I could use pastel, but I'm going to use acrylic in this case. And just bring out a few of these branches in between here that have been a bit lost in the that's the watercolour. So what's cheating? As long as it works, that's what matters. So if we've got a slight problem, not happy with it, we've got to be able to change it. That's what matters. That just gives it that light touch again. It's just bringing out the, rather than being such a solid lump of trees, which it rather is at the moment. I don't want it to be quite as solid as this. So I've used a bit of turquoise, a little bit of cerulean and a little bit of white, just to bring back my... You can see the difference that just even a few lighter marks of paint can make, just to bring those highlights out. I could have used a bit of pastel if I'd wanted to, or gouache. Just needed to bring out some of the breaks of light through the trees.